welcome back to BeHookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany, and in today's tutorial we are going to discuss how to crochet this beautiful headband. This is a free pattern that's available on my blog, and you can find the link to that pattern in the description below. For this tutorial, you will need approximately 80 yards of any kind of worsted weight yarn that you choose, a size 5mm crochet hook, a darning needle, a pair of scissors, and one button. To begin this pattern, we need to start off by creating a slip knot. Now we simply need to place the loop on our hook, tighten up on your working yarn, and we're ready to go. Now for those of you following along with the written pattern, we're going to start off by chaining 6. And to start off round 1, we're going to single crochet into the second chain from the hook and into the remaining 4 chains. Now essentially what we're doing is we're starting on the end where the button is attached. And as you can see, we start out relatively small and we increase until we reach a certain number of stitches, and then we start our woven pattern. So I'm going to skip this first chain that's right next to the hook, and I'm going to work into the second chain from the hook. Now I actually like to flip my chain over and work into the back loop of the chain, and that just gives you a cleaner, more finished looking edge. So I'm just going to insert my hook into the chain. We're single crocheting, so we wrap and pull through, and then wrap and pull through 2. And we're going to have a total of 5 single crochets. And that completes row 1. Following along with the pattern, for row 2, we need to chain 1, and we're going to flip our work, and we are going to single crochet into the same stitch where our chain 1 is coming from. So we're going to insert our hook into this very first stitch and single crochet. Then we need to single crochet into the next 3 stitches, and we're using both loops, so we're single crocheting under both loops of the stitch. And in this last stitch we're going to create an increase. So we are going to single crochet 2 stitches into this very last stitch. And that completes row 2. To begin row 3, we need to chain 1, turn our work, and we're going to single crochet once into the same stitch where the chain 1 is coming from. And then we're going to single crochet once into each of the next 4 stitches. And again in the last stitch we're going to increase by crocheting 2 times into this very last stitch. To start row 4, again, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, put a single crochet into this very first stitch, and 1 single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. And then once we reach the last stitch again, we're going to increase by putting 2 single crochets into the last stitch. And that completes row 4. Row 5, we're going to chain 1 again, turn our work, 1 single crochet into this very first stitch, and 1 into each of the next 6 stitches. And now again, we're going to put 2 single crochets into the last stitch to increase one more time. And that finishes row 5. For row 6, we want to chain 1 again, turn our work. We're going to single crochet again into this very first stitch, and 1 into each of the next 7 stitches. And in the last stitch, we're going to single crochet 2 times. For row 7, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, single crochet into this first stitch with the chain, and once into each of the next 8 stitches. And we're going to put 2 single crochets into the last stitch. That finishes off row 8. Row 9 is the last row that we're going to increase before we start the woven stitch pattern. So again, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, single crochet once into that very first stitch, and single crochet once into each of the next 9 stitches. And then 2 single crochets into the last stitch. To begin the woven pattern, we want to start off by chaining 2, and we're going to turn our work. And now the woven stitch is worked in an even multiple. So if you're using this stitch for anything else, as long as you have an even number of stitches, you're just fine. essentially what we're going to do is work 2 stitches into one, and then we're going to skip the next one. And so figuring out where to work, sometimes you have to think about it a little bit. We have our chain 2 coming from this very last stitch right here. And so we're going to be skipping this one, and we're going to work into the next stitch. And to do the woven stitch, we first need to yarn over. We'll insert our hook into the stitch, and we're going under both loops, and then we'll yarn over and pull up a loop. And now here's where things get a little bit different. We're going to take this last loop that we drew up, and we're going to pull it through this middle one. So without yarning over anything, we're just going to work that loop through the middle loop. Now with 2 loops remaining on our hook, we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 to finish off that portion of the stitch. Now, as I said, we're working 2 stitches in one. So to do the next one, again, we want to yarn over, insert our hook into the same stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then now we're going to pull this last loop through both of the loops on our hook. So no yarning over, just pull that directly through, and sometimes you may have to work them through one at a time to keep from dropping them off of your hook, and that's perfectly fine. Now, as I said, we need to skip the very next stitch, and we're going to work into the stitch right after that. So we're going to yarn over, skip this stitch, work into this one, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull that loop through the middle, yarn over and pull through 2. Now we're going to do the second stitch. We yarn over, insert our hook into the same stitch, yarn over, pull up your loop, and then pull that through the remaining 2 loops on your hook. And we're just going to repeat this pattern across the row. We're going to skip this one, work into the next. I find that when you pull up your loops, if you kind of do that exaggerated a little bit, then it's easier to work that last stitch into the remaining stitches. If you have your loops a little too tight, like if you've got them here, it's going to get really difficult to work that last loop through. So I find if I pull up on it a little bit, and I use my fingers, my thumb and my middle finger of my yarn hand to kind of guide things where they're supposed to go. And you'll find your own way of doing this. This is just one way that I found it makes it easier. We're going to skip this stitch, work into this one, now we're going to skip this one, work into the next, and we're going to skip this one and work into the last stitch. And if you've been doing your count correctly, you should end up so that you can skip a stitch and you're working into the last stitch. And that finishes off row 10. Row 11 begins by chaining 2, turning our work, and now we're still going to maintain that working into one stitch, skipping the next, working into one, skipping the next, only from now on it's much easier because you really don't have to count. If you look at my work here, you can see that I've got these little gaps that are really visible. And those gaps are what we're going to be working into. And if you look really close to your work, you see the gap, and then you notice there's another stitch right here. So we're essentially skipping this stitch, working into that one. Skipping this stitch, working into this one. And we're going to do it the exact same way. We're going to yarn over, insert our hook into that stitch which is the big gap space, and work your stitches the same way. Do the first one and then work the second one. And then we're going to skip this stitch here. We're going to work into this next big gap space. And then again, we see the next gap space right there. So that's how we know where we want to work. And the next one. Okay, and once you reach the end, you notice, well, I don't really have a noticeable gap space to work into, so you're probably thinking, where exactly am I going to work? Now, you might be inclined to work into the chain 2. So if you look right here, this is my 1 and my 2, my chains that I created at the beginning of that first row. And this isn't technically wrong. You can do this. However, when you work into it, you've got your stitches here. It's going to open up a hole a little bit. And I've actually worked this stitch both ways. I've worked it so that you can see the hole, and then I've worked it the way that I'm going to show you. And it actually looks better if you work into a stitch rather than the chain. So we're still maintaining our skip one stitch, work into the next. But if you look from the top, you see I've got a stitch here, got a stitch there, and then my chain starts right here. So I'm still skipping this stitch, which is the one right next to where I worked, and I'm going to work into this stitch. Okay, so work into the stitch, not the chain. If you're looking at it from this direction, this is the stitch that we're skipping, and we're going to work right into this stitch here. So you want to yarn over and create your woven stitches the same way. And that's going to give it a cleaner finish. So as you can see, it maintains the look. So you do have small little holes with this pattern, but if you were to crochet around that chain, it opens up this hole so that it's much bigger and it's more obvious. So to start row 12, again, we just want to chain 2, turn our work, and we know that we need to work into the gap spaces, so I've located mine right here. I'm going to yarn over and work the first woven stitch, and now the second woven stitch. And then work the next one. And as you've noticed, our band is staying the same size. We're not increasing or decreasing, and that's because we're skipping a stitch in between. Now we've come to the edge again, so we remember we don't want to work into the chain, we want to work into the stitch. So we're skipping this stitch right here, and we're working into this stitch right here. And sometimes it might be easier to find the stitch looking at your work from the top until you get the hang of it. Now that we finished row 12, the pattern says that we need to finish 40 rows of woven stitch. So we've got up to row 12 here. Go ahead and finish your woven stitch rows and come back when you're ready to start row 41. Row 41, we're going to start our decreasing section. So we're basically going to mimic the same pattern here, but instead of using the increase technique like we did here, we're going to be decreasing. Once you've crocheted all 40 rows, we're ready to pick up on row 41, and that is going to start off with the chain 1. And then we're going to turn our work. And now we need to single crochet 1 time into every single stitch, and we should have a total of 12. That finishes off row 41. In row 42, we're going to start our first decreasing row. We're going to start off by chaining 1, and then we need to turn our work and now we're going to start off by doing a single crochet decrease. To do that, we're going to insert our hook into the first stitch. We're going to yarn over and pull up a loop, and then we're going to insert our hook into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. So you should have 3 loops on your hook. Then we'll yarn over and pull through all 3. Now we're going to crochet a single crochet 1 time into each of the remaining stitches. And there should be 10 remaining stitches that you worked into. Now we're ready to start row 43. We're going to chain 1 again. We're going to turn our work. We're going to do a single crochet decrease, again, just like we did in the first 2 stitches. We're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, insert our hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, then pull through all 3. Now we're going to single crochet 1 time into the remaining 9 stitches. That completes row 43. Row 44, we're going to chain 1, turn our work. We'll do a single crochet decrease across the first 2 stitches. And now we'll single crochet once into the remaining 8 stitches. That completes row 44. For row 45, we're going to chain 1 again, turn our work, we're going to do a single crochet decrease across the first 2, and then single crochet once into each of the next 7 stitches. Now row 46, we're going to chain 1 and we're going to turn our work, do a single crochet decrease over the first 2 again, and now single crochet 1 time into each of the remaining 6 stitches. For row 47, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, do a single crochet decrease across the first 2 stitches, and then we're going to single crochet once into each of the next 5 stitches. Now we should have a total of 6 stitches, and we need to have a total of 5 in order to match the other side. So we're going to repeat our same row one more time. For row 48, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, do 1 more single crochet decrease across the first 2 stitches, and then single crochet 1 time into each of the next 4 stitches. Now the last row, row 49, we're going to create the buttonhole, and we're going to do that simply by chaining 5, and we're going to turn our work, and now we're going to join our chain to the very last stitch on the other side of the piece, and we're going to do so by joining with the slip stitch. So insert your hook directly into that stitch, yarn over and pull through and then pull that loop through the same loop that was already on your hook. And there, now we've created a buttonhole. From here, we're going to bind off, so leave yourself 4 to 5 inches or so. And then I just like to pull that tail through the loop on my hook to bind off and tighten that. And now all that's left to do is sew on the button and weave in our ends. Now before we weave in our ends, you're gonna have to choose a side that's going to be the correct side and the incorrect side. And virtually it's going to be the same on both sides because the woven stitch is reversible and the single crochet portion, as you can see, looks the same on both sides. So you just simply want to take your darning needle, and I'm going to turn this around, and I like to kind of come back down the side from my chain, and that's going to secure the chain in a little bit more so it looks more natural. And then I'm going to work under basically the last row of single crochet. I'm just going to put my darning needle through all of those stitches, and then I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to skip this little loop here so I don't undo what I've done, and I'm going to work back through the same stitches. And I'll just do this a couple times, depending on how long of a tail you left. You should be able to weave this in maybe 3 times or so, and that should be plenty secure enough. Now once you're done, just cut off the extra, and then we'll move over to the other side. Now I'm just making sure I'm doing this on the same side, and I'm going to thread this tail. And I'm going to do this basically the same that I did on the other side. I'm going to come down, basically jump down a row, and then I'm going to work into those stitches directly across. Now this tail for me isn't as long as the one that I had before, so I can probably only weave through twice. And that's perfectly fine. It should still be plenty secure. And then we'll cut this extra portion off. And now at this point we can go ahead and sew on the button. And you want to sew the button so that it's on the right side. So I've flipped mine over. I'm going to sew it on the opposite end of my loop that I created, the buttonhole. And I'm using a relatively large button, and I'm doing that because the chain 5 is relatively big. You want to make sure that you have a button that is going to be large enough that this chaining of 5 isn't going to slip right off. Okay, so I believe this button is probably about 1.5 inches or so. I think it gives you a pretty good embellishment too. So basically, I mean, this is all pretty trivial now at this point. We'll just go ahead and I cut myself an extra piece of yarn. I'm going to thread my darning needle. And I want to make sure that I have this as straight as possible. I like to leave some work underneath the button rather than coming down and sewing it onto the very end. I feel like it gives it a little bit more security. And you can also wrap this around your head to gauge the size. Now if this size is a little bit too big, then you can move your button up a little bit and that will shorten things up. Or if it's a little too long, you can move it down the end here to make it a little bit bigger. So once you have it in place, you just want to come from the opposite side, come from the back, kind of wiggle it around until you find your buttonhole. And these darning needles don't fit. once you have your button in position, you just want to come through the back side and go through one of the buttonholes, and then pull that through, and then go back down through the opposite buttonhole. And for extra security, I'm going to do that twice. Now there is going to be some stress on this button, especially when you first put it over your head. It's going to stretch, so you want to make sure it holds up. So I'm just going to do that 2 times and then just simply tie it off on the back. And then you'll just cut off your extra ends. And we are all finished. This headband is a super cool design. It's really quick and really easy. They would make pretty good Christmas gifts. And definitely a nice winter accessory. Stay tuned for more videos from BeHookedCrochet.com.